اللهم صل على محمد.
ایک سلام کے 3 اشعار، اس کے بعد مرثیہ محمد والے محمد سلام. علم کا تو ہمیں سایہ بہت ہے، علم کا تو ہمیں سایہ بہت ہے، علی کا لال کام آیا بہت ہے، علم کا تو ہمیں سایہ بہت ہے، کرے غازی نہ کیوں مشکل کشائی، کرے غازی نہ کیوں مشکل کشائی، ہنر بابا سے یہ پایا بہت ہے، علم کا تو ہمیں سایہ بہت ہے، سنا جبریل کچھ اس گھر کی باتیں، سنا جبریل کچھ اس گھر کی باتیں، در زہرا پہ تو آیا بہت ہے، علم کا تو ہمیں سایہ بہت ہے، علی کا لال کام آیا بہت ہے، علم کا تو ہمیں صلوات محمد علیہ. فاتح پڑھنا. محمد والے محمد صلوات. ماں کا جو سایہ فاطمہ کے سر سے اٹھ گیا، ماں کا جو سایہ فاطمہ کے سر سے اٹھ گیا، آرام چین اس کے مقدر سے اٹھ گیا، ماحول جو خوشی کا تھا وہ گھر سے اٹھ گیا، گویا قرار بیت پیمبر سے اٹھ گیا۔ ماں فاطمہ کو چاہنے والی جو مر گئی، صدمے اٹھا کے خدیجہ گزر گئی، صدمے اٹھا کے خدیجہ گزر گئی۔ تھی عمر فاطمہ کی بہت کم، بہت ہی کم، سن 4 سال کا تھا کہ ٹوٹا یہ کوہ غم۔ کہتی تھی اپنے باپ سے رو کر یہ دم بدم، کہیے بچھڑ کے اماں سے کیسے جئیں گے ہم، صبر و قرار سے ہمیں محروم کر گئیں، زندہ رہیں گے کیسے کہ اماں تو مر گئیں، زندہ رہیں گے کیسے کہ اماں تو مر گئیں۔ ہونے لگی نڈھال جو غم سے وہ دل ملول، ہاتھ اس کے سر پہ پھیر کے کہنے لگے رسول، من جانب خدا ہے یہ صدمہ، کرو قبول، اس غم پہ صبر کرنا بھی اس غم کا ہے اصول۔ ہر صدمہ عظیم پہ آنسو بہانے ہیں، دنیا میں تم کو اور بہت غم اٹھانے ہیں، دنیا میں تم کو اور بہت غم اٹھانے ہیں۔ طے ہو چکا جو غسل و کفن کا بھی مرحلہ، تیار ہو گیا جو جنازہ خدیجہ کا، بیٹی نے ماں کا آخری دیدار کر لیا، زہرا کا غم رسول سے دیکھا نہ جا سکا، فرط علم سے زہرا کی حالت بگڑ گئی، اس کم سنی میں ماں سے یہ بچی بچھڑ گئی، اس کم سنی میں ماں سے یہ بچی بچھڑ گئی، ماں کا جو سایہ فاطمہ صلوات اللہ محمد علیہ۔
Jazakallah Jafar Bhai. Brothers and sisters, tonight's Majlis is being sponsored by Wazir and Dosani families. For the maghfirat of their marhumin and all marhum mu'mineen and mu'minats maghfirat, please recite a Surah Fatiha preceded by Salawat.
Salawat.
I would now like to request Hujjatul Islam, Maulana Rizwan Arastu, to please come to the member and address the Majlis. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. We're gathered tonight in the middle of this blessed month of Ramadan to commemorate a very solemn occasion, the death of the first of the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, Khadija al-Kubra, salamullahi alayha. The way I'd like to honor her this evening is to go through some parts of her story that we know. As you're aware, many of the women of the Ahlul Bayt, we don't know too many details about their story, and this is not a coincidence, or it's not just something that happened in history. The kinds of lives that they lived were very private lives, and it was only on certain occasions and in certain specific scenarios that they came out into the public, and history records public events. Right? Look at the news. The news doesn't narrate the private lives of people, certainly not in your house, in private conversations, these kinds of things. These are not newsworthy. History is news of the past. And so history looks at what was public, what was a motivating factor in society, something that moved and shook society. It doesn't look at the spiritual character of somebody. It doesn't look at the monumental changes that happen within a household because of the incredible force of a powerful mother like Lady Khadija. What we know about her are some of the historical things, some of the public events that took place. But what we know about her character is because of the testimony of those who knew her best, Rasulullah and the Imams from her progeny. Everyone's familiar with the famous statement, the praise that Rasulullah offered and counted her amongst the 4 paragons of women. And so she is that kind of status, the mother of Lady Fatima al-Zahra, the best of all women. So this is the kind of status that she has. She played an incredibly important role in Rasulullah's life, and I'd like to share some snippets. One of the first things that we know about her from history is the interactions that she had with Rasulullah in the marketplace. So we're told that Lady Khadija was a very wealthy woman and a businesswoman. And not only was she wealthy and a savvy businesswoman, but her character was impeccable. So she was known for being extremely just, fair with her workers, fair with all of her business dealings. And because of this, she had built an incredible reputation in Mecca. And one of the economic forces in Mecca were the trade trips that they would take north and south. Rihlat ash-shita'i was-sayf, that's mentioned in the Quran. And so during these caravans, merchants would invest. They would collect their goods, whether it was leather, whether it was other goods that they produced within Mecca itself, and they would take them to either Syria in the north to trade during the summers, or in the south, in the winters, they would go south to Yemen and trade there. In every caravan, Lady Khadija had the lion's share of a role in those caravans. Her goods were the main force of the Meccan caravans. And so those who had the ability to work would come line up at her door and contract different deals so they could be her employees, her workers, and take her goods and then deliver them, sell them, bring back the profit, and earn a wage in the process. The upper echelons of Meccan society, those who were not interested in doing business for her, working for her, these were the noblemen of Mecca, the wealthy, the powerful. They also lined up at her door, not because of work and because of the marketplace, but because they wanted her hand in marriage. She was from a noble family, she had noble character in herself, and she had an incredible reputation. And they saw it as the ideal to be able to marry her. And so they gave proposal after proposal, and she turned them down. And she was not young at the time. She was upwards of maybe 40 years old at the time when our story begins, and she meets Rasulullah and engages with him. Rasulullah also lines up in this line of workers to come and join in her caravan. When he meets her, his demeanor, of course, is very different. His character is very different, and she recognizes all of this in him. She wasn't interested. The reason why she was turning away those other suitors was because they didn't have what she wanted. She wasn't looking to join her wealth with someone else's wealth and make some sort of a mass fortune. She wasn't looking for the kinds of things that they thought that she would be looking for. She was one of the few hunafa left in Mecca, those who worshipped one God, those who had rejected these idols that the Meccans had devolved into worshipping and still held on to whatever teachings of Ibrahim alayhi salam still existed in the society. And she wanted a spouse who would honor that and also be a part of that worship of God, and not someone who had devolved into worship of the dunya and worship of idols. In Rasulullah, she saw this. This is before he's a prophet. We're told he's about 25 years of age at this time. So he's still more than a decade away from the appointment as prophet. But he joins and he discusses with her the terms. Different from the other workers, he insists not on being an employee of Lady Khadija, but he says, I'll enter into a partnership with you. Right? So he didn't want to be an employee, he didn't want to have her over him, but he wanted to be an equal partner in dealing with her. And so they engaged in what's known as a mudaraba, some sort of profit-sharing model. She had the capital, the goods, he had the effort and the know-how, and they worked together and then decided to split the profits in a particular way. His reputation preceded him. She knew that he was Sadiq al-Amin. He'd already built this reputation of being a trustworthy person in Mecca, and she was excited to engage in this. Because of that, she invested more with him than she entrusted with her workers. Right? We're told that she gave a lot more capital to him to be able to do with as he saw fit. But she also wanted to get to know him better, and so she employed one of her servants named Maysara, and told Maysara to be a servant to Muhammad during this journey, and to be with him, to do whatever he needed to do, to help him, but also to not be a spy in a negative way, but to be her eyes and ears on the ground, and to report to her about his dealings, his character, how he managed himself during this journey. Sometime later, when the caravan returns, Maysara comes back to Lady Khadija, and he is raving with all sorts of praise of Rasulullah. That he was amazing in the marketplace, his dealings were impeccable, he was extremely organized in his business dealings, he was trustworthy, truthful, he was able to convince people, he doubled whatever capital you gave him. But he says, more than all of that, we had one particular experience that sticks out, he says. As we were traveling, we went to one oasis, and there was a tree there, and there's some shade from the tree, and so Rasulullah, I'll say Muhammad, he went and sat under that tree. When he did, there was a monk in a nearby monastery, sounds too grand, but some sort of we could call it a monastery, near that tree. When he sees this person sitting under the tree, he runs out and he begins to kiss his feet and greets him. And he declares the Shahada spontaneously and says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and I declare that you are Ahmad. And so when he tries to when they ask, how do you know this? What are you saying? What's the basis for what you're saying? He says that the last person to sit under this tree was Isa. And he said that the next person after me to sit under this tree will be my successor, my final successor, Ahmad. And so Rasulullah fulfilled that prophecy, and this monk by the name of Nestorius, he makes his commitment. He advises Maysara, the servant of Muhammad, also to be with this person, stick with this person. This is the messenger of the end of time, and this is the fulfillment of the prophecy of all the prophets. And he lavishes all the praise that he's learned from the books, and he delivers this, and Maysara is there to witness that. And so he then conveys this to Lady Khadija on his return, and she is also taken by this description. She's amazed by this prophecy. She goes to Rasulullah, and after they have their discussions about the business dealings and they see the master prophet that he's brought in, she wants to confirm the story. She narrates the story that Maysara has given, and he confirms, yes, this is true. So from that point, she was a believer. And she had already been a monotheist. She had already been a believer in the past prophets. But now she sees not only the character of Rasulullah, but the prophecies of others also telling her who he is. And she believes in these prophecies and is committed to him as the other members of the Prophet's family, Abdul Muttalib and Abu Talib and Fatima bint Asad and Amina and the rest, have always known who he was and who he was destined to be. She joins their ranks as one of the believers before there's even a formal Islam and a formal prophethood, but she's a believer in what is to come and what he's to be. Because of this interaction, the motivation that Lady Khadija had to get married is now at its peak. She's found the person that can fulfill all of her desires, that can live up to the kind of expectations. He worships God the way she knows that God should be worshipped. We're told by actually Ammar Yasir. So Ammar bin Yasir in Tarikh al-Yaqubi, he narrates the following about the marriage of Lady Khadija and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He first makes the claim in the narration. He says that I know more about the marriage than anyone else, because I was actually part of it. I was the go-between. So he says that I was actually a good friend of Rasulullah, and we were walking in the environs of Masjid al-Haram. And as we were walking, we passed by Khadija and Hala. So Hala is the sister of Lady Khadija. Their father is Khuwaylid bin Asad. And so these two are sisters. So Hala and Khadija are sitting together. They pass by. Hala gets up and she addresses Ammar, and she asks, does your friend have any interest in Khadija? And so Ammar says, I don't know, let me ask him. He goes back, asks Rasulullah. He's also very excited by the initiation that Khadija and Hala have made. And he sends Ammar back saying, please make some sort of appointment that we can come the next day and talk about this in more detail. So that's how the match is made, and the engagement is done right in the environs of Masjid al-Haram. The next day, Abu Talib, as the caretaker of Rasulullah is an adult now, but he's still his father figure in his life. So Abu Talib, some other members of Banu Hashim, they all go together to Lady Khadija's home. She doesn't have her father anymore. Her father had died in one of the battles of Jahiliyyah. One of her uncles is now seen as her wali, right? The authority who has the authority to give her hand in marriage. Abu Talib addresses the gathering in the following way. He says, praise to the Lord of the Kaaba, who placed us among the offsprings of Abraham and the descendants of Ishmael, and settled us in this safe sanctuary, and made us rulers over people, and blessed us in the city in which we live. Thereafter I say that this nephew of mine is a man who, when measured against any man of Quraysh, tips the balance, who, when compared to any man, proves to be greater. No match has he among God's creatures, though he is poor in wealth, but then wealth comes and goes. It is but a fleeting shadow. He has want for Khadija, and she has want for him. Thus we have come to ask you for her hand at her pleasure and her request. The bridal gift, whatever you demand, that which is due immediately and that which is due later, is on me to be paid out of my holdings. By the Lord of this house, my nephew has great promise, a piety that is well known, and an insight that is beyond his years. As this is the khutbah, the sermon that Abu Talib delivers to introduce the affair, to initiate the proposal to Khadija, and these are the words that he uses. On Khadija's behalf, her uncle, Amr ibn Asad. So Amr ibn Asad, Khuwaylid's brother, he tries to respond, but some reports report that he was inebriated. Others just say that he was bumbling. He couldn't handle the affair. He couldn't respond to Abu Talib's eloquence in a way that was suitable. So he tries to speak, is not able to. And Lady Khadija herself says, Uncle, while others deem you as my wali, I'm actually malikatul li amri. I'm a master of my own affairs. Right? Even in our Sharia now, we still have that idea. A young woman is under the wilaya of her father and her paternal grandfather in terms of marriage, meaning that, yes, she has the say to get married or not get married, but she shares that say with her father and her paternal grandfather. Right? And they have to also give their consent, as long as they're thinking in her best interest and all of that, then they have to give her consent, give their consent before she can get married to somebody. However, even if you have someone who's unmarried, but she's older and now independent in her affairs, she's a master of her own affairs, malikatul li amriha, right? Then she no longer needs that wilaya. Either she has no father and grandfather, or they're no longer part of her life. She manages her own affairs. She earns herself. She's a master of her own affairs. Then she doesn't need that permission anymore. And so Lady Khadija sets that precedent. She also says that, while you have wilaya in other people's eyes, I'm able to speak for myself. And so she takes over the response, and she speaks with Abu Talib and engages with him. So she offers herself in marriage, begins the sigha herself, and Abu Talib responds and accepts it on behalf of Rasulullah. The mahr that they set is referred to as 12 purses, 12 uqiyya and a half. So a purse, uqiyya, is a kind of a purse that contains some coins. Whether it's a literal purse or just a term that's used for a certain set of coins. It's 40 silver coins. Right? So 12 times 40 is 480, plus another half is another 20, so 500 silver coins. 500 dirham was the mahr that Rasulullah himself set and agreed that this is the mahr that I will give as the bridal gift to Lady Khadija. Khadija, in her turn, she accepts all the terms, but she recognizes that Rasulullah it's going to be difficult for him to pay this, and difficult for Abu Talib as well. So she, being wealthy, she says that I accept all the terms, but I take the 12 and a half purses mahr that you have to give me, and I take it upon myself. I myself will bear this burden. Meaning that she won't, there's no payment. Right? It's a gift to her. She says, I'll take it on myself, meaning basically I've forgiven you for this payment. Right? And this has also worked its way into our Sharia. We have so many ahadith praising the woman who is both strong in faith and who asks for very little mahr. Right? That those are seen as two of the good qualities to look for in a spouse, in a wife, when you're getting married to her. So they conclude the marriage ceremony. Lady Khadija, again, speaking on her own behalf, she asks Rasulullah to ask Abu Talib to slaughter a camel and create a feast, a walima, for them to celebrate their marriage. And they do all of this, and they begin their marriage that way. Sometime later, they have their first child, their first son, by the name of Qasim. So for that reason, Rasulullah is known with the kunya Abu Qasim. Unfortunately, Qasim doesn't live very long. We're told that he died within the first at least 2 years, at most 2 years of his life. So while he was still suckling, he passed away. Of course, the sadness was great. One day, we're told that Lady Khadija, Rasulullah comes home and Lady Khadija was crying. And so he asks her, what's happened that's caused you to cry in this way? Of course, you're grieving for our son. So she says that I was suckling him. I feel my breast swell, and it reminded me of the child that I lost. And so because of that, I'm crying. Rasulullah says that I can give you very good news. Allah has told me that on the day of judgment, the son of ours will be waiting at the doors of paradise until you enter with him. And this is a gift not only to you, but to all parents who are bereaved of their children, of their young children. Right? He says the following. He says, this is God's gift to every bereaved believer who is patient in the loss of his child. So that's the one prerequisite. So it's not simply loss that brings sympathy or brings Allah's reward. Right? So just because I fall sick doesn't mean I am entitled to reward by God. Or just because I face some tragedy doesn't mean that that's a source of salvation. Of course, what it depends on is my reaction to that difficulty, that tragedy. Right? So when I see this in the light of Allah as my Lord, managing my affairs in a way that's suitable to me, He is testing me now by depriving me of some comfort that I had, taking away some health or wealth or the life of some loved one that I had. When I see this as Allah's test of me, and I submit to the test and accept that this is in Allah's wisdom, this is the best thing for me. I can be sad. I can be absolutely sad, and that doesn't take away from the fact that I can accept this as Allah's decree for me. Right? Both things can be true. But just being sad and just crying, for instance, without accepting this as Allah's decree brings no reward. What brings the reward is having that kind of perspective to see that this is Allah's test. And Allah is all-wise, that every test He gives is, in His wisdom, the best test that I need at this time. It's not a punishment to trick me or to push me away. It's something to give me an opportunity to now become more patient, better, stronger. So if I have that perspective and I do my best to try to connect to Allah better through dua, through patience, certainly at very least through submission, that this is your will and I'll accept it. Right? That is what brings reward. And so Rasulullah says, this is God's gift to every believer who is patient in the loss of his child. That's when you have a young child, either one that you lose in childbirth or before childbirth, or young children that you lose, that Allah will not punish you. He will not deprive you of paradise, but rather He'll rejoin you with that child in paradise. He says, why? God is mightier and nobler than to take from a believer the love of his life, and for that believer to persevere in patience and praise God through that loss, and to then subject him to any further torment. Because Allah won't give you double the pain. He's given you the pain in the dunya as a test. You've succeeded in the test, assuming you've succeeded in the test by being patient and connecting with Allah. Then on the day of judgment, He's not going to make you feel loss again by saying, your child is in paradise, but for instance, you have to go to hellfire. He will join you again with them. The child will become a shafi', a source of intercession for you, and be with you as you enter into paradise. The partnership that they had started with in their marriage, that continued. We're told for 12 years, until the Prophet's 37 years of age, he continued as a partner with Lady Khadija, engaging in these business transactions, these caravans and all of this. And they generated incredible wealth. And they devoted this wealth to the poor of Mecca. So they became known as those who would always have their hand open, always offer food and clothing and assistance and whatever was needed to the poor. They were the source of succor for all of them. When the Prophet reached the age of 37, Allah commands him to cease these business transactions. Now that's enough. of that. And so he takes himself out of the partnership. Khadija apparently continues because her wealth actually amasses. I don't know if we realize how much wealth it was or how much barakah there was. I'll share some thoughts on that a little bit later, inshallah. But Rasulullah pulls out of the transaction. Whatever profits were his, he gives to charity. And now he engages even more in ibadah, particularly in that i'tikaf, that tahannuth that he would engage in Mount Hira. So he'd done this occasionally, I should say occasional, but regularly on a more sporadic basis throughout his life. But after the age of 37, then he spends a lot more time going up to Hira. I think we usually think of him going alone, spending time alone there, but we're told in reports that no, actually he had companions when he was there. Right? So Imam Ali, of course, would be there with him, or he would be the go-between to bring rations and bring food for him. Even Lady Khadija and Zayd ibn Haritha, a part of the household of Rasulullah, they would also join him in Hira at some times, and they would worship with him and engage all of this with him. And it wasn't only a private affair. This is also, I think, something very interesting that we don't realize enough. So Rasulullah, when he's at home, he's the source of succor for all these poor people of Mecca, always giving, so they could come to his house and receive whatever they needed. When he goes off for this tahannuth, this i'tikaf in the cave of Hira, even there, he doesn't cut himself off from them because the need of those poor people doesn't end when he goes off for a month at a time. And so recognizing that they depend on him, he carries those provisions that he needs to give to them to Hira and instructs them to come to Hira and receive whatever they need from him there. And so again, Imam Ali and Rasulullah are engaged in this back and forth, taking things over there, engaging in worship, but then also making sure that they're taking care of the affairs of these people who are dependent on them for their livelihood and their well-being. So that's an aspect of the i'tikaf that we, I think, don't pay enough attention to realize that it wasn't a cutting off from society at all. It was engagement with worship, and yes, cutting off from kind of the mundane, the maybe meaningless aspects of daily life. But those aspects that were part of ibadah and staying connected with Allah, Rasulullah continued with those as he always did. At the age of 40, we're told that this is, of course, the year in which the Prophet is appointed as a Rasul, as a messenger. On the 27th of Rajab, in that year, his 40th year, this is when he's appointed as messenger, and it seems like the ibadah that he is taught at that time is prayer. Right? So he's taught how to do wudu, and he's taught the actions and the words of prayer. Not exactly the prayer that we have now, because the original prayer was a 2 rak'ah prayer. And there weren't designated times to the prayer either. So whenever he wanted to pray, he would pray, but the angels taught him a particular form of prayer and the wudu. And so from that age of 40, this is his mandate, to pray and to teach those around him to pray as well. The Quran didn't come down for another 3 years at least. Right? So the revelation of Quran doesn't coincide with the bi'thah. It comes later. The bi'thah is when he's appointed as Rasul, he's now calling people, but he's calling them to worship Allah to basic principles, and the main action that they're engaged in is this worship of Allah through salah. So of course he comes home, and those who are in his Ahlul Bayt, they're the first that he teaches. So Lady Khadija, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Zayd ibn Haritha, they are the first to join him in prayer. We're told in one narration that Abu Talib comes over with Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, Ja'far al-Tayyar, and Rasulullah and Ali and Khadija are in Jama'ah, they're praying. Zayd ibn Haritha is on the side of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Abu Talib's encouragement to Ja'far is Sil Janah ibn Abik. Sorry, it would be, anyway, your uncle. So Sil Janahahu. Become the other wing of Rasulullah. So it's like Rasulullah is praying and Imam Ali is on one side. He says, be on the other side. Be like the 2 wings of Rasulullah. and join him in prayer. And so Ja'far al-Tayyar also joins them. So very, very quickly, these people who were very close to Rasulullah and who knew the prophecies, who had engaged with the Christian monks and the Jews who had knowledge of the prophecies, they come to believe in him immediately. They join him in prayer. This is one of the wrongs that has been done to the Ahlul Bayt, to not only Abu Talib but all of the members of the Ahlul Bayt, that they have been made out to be people who were reluctant to believe or believed very late, or it took a lot to convince them, and he had to, for instance, go through all sorts of invitations and things like that to convince them. When the reality is that this is the family of Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib himself had full knowledge of who Rasulullah is. Right? And he's raised his children with that full knowledge. This is not a secret. This is not something that all of a sudden Rasulullah stumbled into at the age of 40. Right? Imam Ali Islam in Nahj al-Balaghi tells us that from the time he was weaned off of milk, the greatest of Allah's angels were there training him, raising Rasulullah, teaching him. He was always engaged with these angels. They were his teachers. They were teaching the character that he had. It's not just that he was raised well by his parents, for instance, or by his grandfather. It's not just that he had good genes or something like that, but he was raised by these angels and taught. All the people around him knew these prophecies. Abdul Muttalib gave him to the care of Abu Talib, particularly for this reason, because Abu Talib was the one who recognized these prophecies and recognized who Rasulullah is, and he could best stand in Abdul Muttalib's footsteps and guard him, take care of him. He had the clout, he had the wisdom, he had the commitment to protect Rasulullah. And then Fatima bint Asad, Amina, there's a tradition that we have from the Ahlul Bayt that at the birth of Rasulullah, Amina was shown visions. And she saw visions of who this child is going to be. And it's angels and clouds, just an amazing image that is painted in that vision. And when she sees this, Fatima bint Asad, who's there helping her with childbirth, they look at each other, she also sees it. And this becomes their secret. She goes and tells Abu Talib, and he says, this is no surprise, this is what we've always known. They're all on the same page with this. And that interaction with Bahira as well, the Christian monk. Abu Talib takes Rasulullah when he's young, and they stop by this monastery on their caravan trip. And when Bahira sees certain signs, he realized that this is the time for the fulfillment of a prophecy that he had been waiting for. The story itself is very interesting. He is in a monastery where in the time of Isa alayhi salam, there was a Jewish village there, and these Jews had conspired with the Romans against Isa, right? Because they rejected him as the Messiah. Now, he's a Bani Israel prophet, but they reject him as the Messiah. They work against him with the Romans. And because that, Shamu'un, Simon Peter, Isa alayhi salam's successor, his Ali, right, he calls down Allah's la'an on this village. And when he calls down the la'an of Allah on the village, all the resources of the village dry up. The water, the oasis or the water that was the source of that village, it dries up. And that whole village falls apart. And he tells them, he says that this village, like the spring and the village will only come back to life at the time of the last prophet. And so a whole line of devotees of Isa, they take up residence there. They build a monastery there and they take up residence there waiting for this to happen, kind of guardians of this dried up pool, waiting for the pool to start bubbling again, so that they know that now it's the time of Rasulullah. And so Bahira is the last of those monks. And so when he sees the signs, he recognizes, he sees the spring bubble up, he sees all of these things happening, then he recognizes that this is now the time. The caravan comes, he searches out and he sees Rasulullah, he sees certain signs, he talks to Abu Talib. When he speaks to Abu Talib and determines that this is indeed that Ahmad that Isa had told us about, and he gives certain advice and certain warnings to Abu Talib. First, Abu Talib is surprised, but then they look at each other and they realize that they're on the same page. They both heard the same prophecies. They're both waiting for the same prophet. They're both protectors of the same prophet. And there's this connection that happens at that point between this Bahira, who's been waiting all of these generations, right, with his teachers and their teachers, for this occurrence, and now finally the fulfillment is on the horizon. It seems like he didn't make it to live, but at least he made it to this point where he can become one of the confirmers to strengthen Abu Talib and to now give us also confidence and strength that those prophecies were true, that Rasulullah is true. This is all truth from Allah. A few years later, Lady Khadija gives birth to a few daughters, and then the son that she gives birth to is known as Abdullah. This is after the Bi'tha. He's also known as Tahir and Tayyib. And our scholars think that these are just nicknames for Abdullah. They're not three different sons, but rather Abdullah is the one son, and Tahir and Tayyib, pure and good. These were nicknames that were given to him. Perhaps because he's born after Islam, after formal Islam, after the Prophet's appointed as a messenger, and so he's given these nicknames. He also doesn't live long at all, maybe even a shorter time period than Qasim. They take his body and they go to Hajun, to Al-Ma'la, where the cemetery is, and they bury him there. This is the same cemetery that Hashim and Abdul Muttalib were buried in, and even Qasim was buried there. So they bury him there, and Rasulullah, when he's returning from the graveyard, coming back into Mecca, he passes Al-As ibn Wa'il and his son Amr ibn Al-As. So Al-As ibn Wa'il, one of the leaders of Quraysh, when we talk about Quraysh and kind of this group of people who are engaged constantly in tormenting Rasulullah and fighting against him and mocking him, Al-As ibn Wa'il was one of these individuals. And his son Amr ibn Al-As followed directly in his father's footsteps. So they passed Rasulullah. They seem to make some sort of gestures of sympathy for the loss of his child. But once he's passed, they look at each other and they declare to each other how much they hate this Muhammad. Right? Amr ibn As tells his father, I hate this man from the bottom of my heart. The father says, yes, I do too, but thankfully he is abtar. Right? Thankfully he is cut off. Right? This word abtar is also interesting because in Farsi they use a term that tells us dum buride. Right? So with sheep, because they have long tails and they get messy, so sheep breeders will often dock them. They'll use something to cut off their tails and make their tails short, or even take them off altogether. And that animal with no tail or a cut off tail is known as an abtar. Right? So something that has no continuity, there's no end to it. And so As ibn Wa'il says this, thankfully he's abtar. And we only have to deal with him for a couple of days. Once he's dead, there's no legacy because he has no sons. He has some daughters, but they're of no consequence in his mind. He has no sons, there's no name to last, no continuity, so we'll be rid of him soon enough. All we have to do is wait for him to die or kill him ourselves. And that's when Suratul Kawthar is revealed. Both as a consolation, for Rasulullah, Lady Khadija, Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar. So usually it's translated as we have already given you. We've given you in the past. We have given you Kawthar. But it seems because this is this incident that gave rise to the surah, this is actually a promise of something that's to come to pass. And this is something that happens in the Quran sometimes that it throws us off a little bit because in Arabic the tenses are not as solid as the tenses we're used to in English. So sometimes they'll use past tense for future events and it throws us off. We have many instances of this in the Quran. Right? So it's something that's going to happen in the future. It's mustaqbil, but it's muhaqqaqul wuqu. So something that's so certainly going to happen in the future. In Arabic, you can refer to it as having already happened in the past. One example I can think of, I told some of the students in the Quran class, one of the examples I can think of in English where we do this is if you ask me for something, say get me a glass of water, I say done. Right? I haven't even moved yet. I haven't even gotten up to get it yet, but I say it's done. Right? I'm telling you about what I'm going to do in the future, but I want to tell you how certainly I will do it by saying I've already done it. Right? So it seems like Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar is also like that. Not that we have given you abundance in the past, referring to, for instance, the blessings that he's received in the past, but we are going to give you this source of abundance, this kawthar. And then it makes sense that he's just lost his son, a male child, and he's lost his previous male child as well. So he's known as Abul Banat. Right? He's the father of daughters, and that's used as an insult by the Arabs because they see that as a fault in somebody. You're a father of many daughters. That means you have no future. Right? But he takes pride in that. But now the surah comes down to say that the loss of your son, while something that causes grief, is not the end of your line or the end of the efficacy of your mission. We will give you the source of abundance. Right? So, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. So pray to Allah and especially do takbir. We talked about the takbir, wanhar, means to do takbir up to your nahr. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. This Amr ibn As ibn Wa'il, his father, right, they who are your haters and your mockers and those who want to detract from you, they call you abtar, actually they're abtar. You have a source of plenty that's going to continue to the day of judgment. They have nothing. They have some dunya, that dunya is going to be taken from them, and then there's no akhirah for them except hellfire. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the things that we see from Lady Khadija, one of the sources of comfort that she offered Rasulullah was in the face of the torment that he faced. Right, because he was subjected to all sorts of ridicule, mocking by the Quraysh. And it wasn't only words, but they even escalated to different acts of torment, sometimes violence even. So one incident that illustrates this is the time when these three individuals, it seemed like almost like a dare, we think of it now. These three individuals, one is Uqbat ibn Abi Mu'ayt, the father of the eventual Walid ibn Uqba, the one who is appointed as governor of Kufa, gets so drunk and prays Fajr 4 rak'ah and then turns around and says, was that enough or should I pray more? His father, Uqbat ibn Abi Mu'ayt, joins together with the same As ibn Wa'il and An-Nadr ibn Harith, who's one of the mustahzi'een, one of the mockers of Rasulullah, who Allah says, Inna kafaynaka al-mustahzi'een, which again is past tense, but I think it's a promise for the future. We will take care of these mustahzi'een for you. We will wipe them out. And 5 of them, they're killed in various ways. Gabriel does different things to them and wipes them out within the course of a couple of days after that verse is revealed. So this Nadr ibn Harith is one of those 3. These 3, they decide that they're going to teach this Muhammad a lesson. He dares come out into the masjid and pray. So while he's praying, they say, let's cause some mischief. So they go over that. In those days, the Hazwara was part of what we call Masjid al-Haram now, but it's past the Mas'a, right, past Safa and Marwa. That's where they used to sacrifice animals. So you can imagine if you're sacrificing animals, there's going to be a lot of mess as well. So they go over there, they take the afterbirth of a camel, the uterus, the placenta of a camel, they collect it somehow. And as Rasulullah is in sajda, they come and they dump the whole thing on his back and on his head. And they have a whole group of supporters. They're all laughing and mocking. Rasulullah doesn't move. He gets up from sajda. We're told in the same time, Lady Khadija comes into the masjid with Lady Fatima. Right? She sees what's happening. She sees the mockers. She sees what's the state of Rasulullah with all of this mess and the smell and stench around him, and she realizes what's happened. She puts Fatima down. Fatima goes and runs to her father and starts to try to clean him off. Rasulullah calls down Allah's la'an on the people who have perpetrated this. Right? We're told that he leaves with Khadija and Fatima, delivers them home, and then goes straight to Abu Talib's house. He knocks on the door. When Abu Talib answers, he says, Uncle, what is my position? What is my status in Banu Hashim? And so he tells him the whole story, what's happened. Abu Talib sees his state. He calls Hamza and some of the other members of the Banu Hashim. He orders some of his servants to clean Rasulullah up, give him a change of clothes, and they all march back to Masjid al-Haram. This is an incredible story because it shows the power that Abu Talib had. He's not some feeble old man. He inspired fear in the hearts of these mushrikeen, these Quraysh. So he comes back with Hamza. They can see the anger on his face. They're all tense, waiting to see what he's going to do. He tells Hamza to go get some more of the placenta of a camel. He lines these people up who had perpetrated this on Rasulullah. He tells them to kneel. And he tells Hamza to take this placenta and rub it on the faces, on the beards, and on the mustaches of these three individuals, and maybe even the other individuals who mocked alongside with them and goaded them on. And he degrades them like that publicly, and then he comes to Rasulullah and says, "This is your status in Banu Hashim." So Abu Talib is an incredible pillar of support. Lady Khadija, of course, is there to comfort him, to support him, to be there constantly. In the face of all the ugliness that he saw outside, he could come home and have beauty and comfort and love and support without any bounds within his own home. The wealth of Khadija is not spent. We know about the boycott. During the boycott, the Quraysh tried to do whatever they could to break Rasulullah economically, socially. One of the things that helped them to get through that 4 to maybe 7 years of boycott, based on different reports, was the wealth of Khadija. Right? So they would raise prices as much as they could. They would tell people in the market not to trade with them. But fortunately, due to the blessing of Lady Khadija's wealth, they were able to eke by and get through that very difficult time. But her wealth, I think, sometimes we have this idea that maybe it petered out. Like, how long can her wealth last? It's dunya after all, so it must have, she must have spent everything during the boycott, and then by the time she died, there must be nothing left. Let me fast forward a little bit to during the Hijrah. So during the Hijrah, Rasulullah takes charge of, first of all, making sure that all of the Muslims of Mecca safely can get out to Yathrib, where they now have a new alliance, new protectors. The Ansar have already made certain commitments, and now he's shuttling Muslims from Mecca to Medina to engage in the Hijrah before he himself goes. So he makes sure everyone goes. Whoever can't afford to go, he bankrolls them. He pays for whatever they need, whether it's transportation, food, and whatever else, to make sure that they can all get out safely. Until finally, it's just him and Imam Ali left in Mecca. He's been able to get everyone else out. And when I say him and Imam Ali, amongst the men, the women are still there. Fawatim are still there, and other women are still there. Some of the weaker people who couldn't make the journey are still there. Those Imam Ali will take later on. So Rasulullah, there's the assassination attempt. He escapes. He goes to the cave of Thawr and waits. A few days later, Imam Ali, along with Hind ibn Abi Hind or Hind ibn Abi Hala. He's known by two different names. This is the nephew of Khadija. So Hala's son from one of her previous marriages, either to Abu Hind or Abu Hala. She had two different husbands. So this Hind is a male's name as well. It can be a woman's name or a man's name. So here it's a man's name. Hind and Amir al-Mu'mineen, they come to the cave of Thawr to reunite with the Prophet, to give him updates of what's happening in Mecca, and also to figure out how to plan the logistics for his migration now to Yathrib. Abu Bakr is also there as a bystander. Rasulullah says that we need 3 camels to make this journey. One for myself, one for Abu Bakr who's here, and one for our guide, Ibn Urayqat. So he tells Hind to procure these 3. Abu Bakr interjects to say, I have 2 already that are ready, you can have those. Rasulullah refuses. He says, I will not take them from you unless you ask or you accept a payment. If I give you fair payment for them, then I will take them from you. I won't take them as gifts though. So Abu Bakr says, if that's how you want to do it, then that's fine. I'll sell them to you. So he sells the 2 to him, and then Hind goes and buys, not only gets these 2, but he buys a 3rd one as well and brings those to Rasulullah. Then he gives instructions to Imam Ali and says that there are all these different, there are weak people, women who are still in Mecca. You need to make sure to gather all of them and get them ready for the Hijrah. You're in charge of bringing them all to Medina. whatever expenses they need, whatever mounts they need, you have the funds to buy all of that. All the amanas that people have deposited with me, of course, you have to return those as well. So he gives all these jobs to him. In the meanwhile, Abu Bakr, he sees the Prophet spending here and spending there, and there's all these incredible expenses, buying camels left and right. And he says, where's all this wealth coming from that you are able to spend so freely? Rasulullah's response is the following: have you forgotten about Khadija's wealth? No wealth has benefited me as Khadija's wealth has. All these years, by the blessing of her wealth, I have paid off the debts of the debt-riddled, provided the needy with mounts for conveyance, sheltered them from the calamities of life, and facilitated the emigration of those who had no means. In the summer and winter trade journeys of Quraysh, a significant segment of the caravan used to belong to Khadija. She was the wealthiest of the Quraysh. She allowed me to spend freely from her wealth while she lived, and now that she has passed, I and my daughters have inherited her vast wealth, and we spend it in God's way. Khadija's wealth was not something small. I don't know if we can imagine what it was. I mean, you can't calculate it, but the amount that it was and the barakah that was there because of her intention and her devotion and the fact that she had given it so freely in such a noble cause, say the most noble cause, makes its bounds unlimited. That was also a kind of kauthar they were given. In the 10th year, or perhaps even in the 13th year, I think in the 13th year, finally these two bastions of support that Rasulullah had benefited from throughout his journey, they are lost. In childhood, he had lost his parents, his father before he was born, his mother when he was very young. He lost Abu Muttalib as well when he was very young. But Allah had given him not only those tests and those trials, but he had replaced the losses with others. Right? So the father that he lost, he found again in Abdul Muttalib. He found again in Abu Talib. And he found again in the caretaker Halima, her husband Harith. He was also like a father to him. He had three fathers that he received in exchange for the one loss of Abdullah. And mothers as well. He would call Halima his mother after his mother. Fatima bint Asad also was a mother figure to him throughout his childhood. So he had been challenged in various ways. Allah had given him these tests of loss. He had also given him incredible blessing. In his older age, as he engaged in this journey of prophethood and the mission that was very difficult for him, he had these two pillars of strength. Abu Talib, who had incredible clout, incredible strength, charisma, devotion to Rasulullah, and was willing to use everything that he had in the cause of truth, even if it meant self-sacrifice. Right? So Abu Talib was one who was willing to put his own sons and even his own self in Rasulullah's bed. This wasn't just on Laylatul Mabit, that one time that Imam Ali puts himself on the bed of Rasulullah. This is a lifetime habit, a lifetime practice that Abu Talib had taught him. They would constantly move. Rasulullah would never sleep in the same bed twice. He would go to bed, and then in the middle of the night, Abu Talib would come and say, "You get it, one of my sons is going to sleep in your place, you come and sleep in his bed." And he was constantly shuffling him around multiple times, sometimes during the night. And he didn't care if an assassin came and killed one of his sons, as long as Rasulullah was safe. And we're told when dinner would be served, they would be told to stop and wait until Rasulullah came. He would first be allowed to eat, and once he had taken what he wanted to take, then his own sons could take. This is the kind of self-sacrifice that Abu Talib has shown him from childhood. The power, the clout, the wealth, whatever he had, he was also willing to give all that in Rasulullah's way. And he didn't even want any fame for it. He was willing to even go down in history as a mushrik, have people think that he never believed in Rasulullah if only Rasulullah could be saved. He's compared to Mu'min Ali Fir'aun, to Ashabul Kahf, people who had the strongest of faith, but were willing or were forced into a position where they had to hide that in taqiyya, and they could never display it for the greater good. And that their reward is twice. Once for the devotion and belief that they had, and once for the willingness and the ability and the tact and the wisdom to do taqiyya and to conceal that for the greater good. The other pillar of strength was Khadija. And it wasn't just her wealth. That's a disservice to say just because she was wealthy, that was the one contribution that she offered. That was an incredible contribution, and we owe her a debt because of that. Rasulullah's mission would not have been successful as we know it, except that Allah made Khadija the source of all the wealth that he needed to fulfill this mission. But there's so many aspects to her personality and their relationship that were integral to Rasulullah's success. In the 13th year after the Bi'tha, just before the Hijrah, the reason why the Prophet had to leave Mecca and go on this Hijrah was because his two pillars of support had died. So during this last year in Mecca, Lady Khadija passes away during the month of Ramadan on the 10th. And the grief of that loss was incredible for Rasulullah. He had grieved two of his sons who had passed away. He lost his mother in childhood, Abdul Muttalib. But the loss of Lady Khadija was extremely difficult for him. Again, not only because she was the source of wealth, the wealth was, that's fine, that helped him, and his wealth is still there. But the companionship that she offered, the support, she believed in him when no one else believed in him. She stood and prayed behind him when no one else did. She gave him children. None of his other wives after were able to give him children besides Maryam. And so for all these reasons, he grieved her dearly. On her deathbed, he visited her, and she was in a lot of pain. He makes a prayer and says, I pray that the pain and suffering that you're experiencing now, Allah will change that into a great good in the hereafter. That again, the suffering that you're being subjected to by the wise God is in your best interest. And you have this devotion, you have a commitment to Allah. The suffering that you have now will translate into immense reward in the hereafter. They bury her in the graveyard of Ma'la, next to Abdul Muttalib, next to her two sons. We're told afterwards, Fatima, who's, if this is the year 13, she's about 8 years old at the time, so not a young girl, but she comes to Rasulullah and says, where's my mother? And so at that age, of course, she was at the funeral. She knows that her mother has died, that she's buried. So it wasn't a question about, where is she and why is she not coming home, these kinds of things. But she says, where is my mother? So Gabriel comes down with a message from Allah for Lady Fatima. And he says that Allah sends his salam to you, O Fatima. She responds the way her mother had responded before. Allahu salam. Wa minhu salam wa ilayhi ya'udu salam wa ala Jabrail salam wa alayka ya Rasulullah salam. And Gabriel tells her that Allah wants to inform Fatima that her mother is or destined for paradise in palaces of gold and ruby in the company of Asiya and Maryam bint Imran. So she should know the kind of status that her mother has, that she will be in the company of those kinds of women in the hereafter until you can be rejoined together with her. We salute Lady Khadija, we honor her, we offer our condolences to Rasulullah and to the great-grandson of Lady Khadija al-Kubra. Right, we're told in Dua Nudba that one of the names of our Imam is Yabna Khadija al-Gharra. Okay, so he's recognized, and one of the sources of his honor is that he's a descendant of Khadija, right, the noble. May Allah have mercy on her soul. May He honor her in the hereafter as He has honored her in the dunya. May He allow us to always be cognizant of the immense debt that we owe her. And let us emulate her. She's one of the paragons for women and one of the paragons for the believers. So let us emulate her in her devotion to Rasulullah, in her devotion to the Ahlul Bayt. in her generosity, her selflessness. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. Join me as we recite the ziyarah for the بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام ولك السلام وإليك يعود السلام. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين. السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على خديجة الغراء أم المؤمنين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين. السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين. السلام على محمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين. السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد. السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي. السلام على الحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري. السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي وابن خديجة الغراء. السلام عليكم جميعا أهل بيت النبوة ورحمة الله وبركاته.